You're watching Face to Face. I'm your host, Tim Vince, and I'm very pleased to be joined by the Executive Director of OCCA, Charlie Stiles.
It's great to be with you.
Yeah, really great. And so the first thing we have to say is, what's OCCA?
Great. Well, OCCA is the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics.
Yeah.
OCCA, Oxford, because we're
Yes.
in Oxford,
Yeah.
Which we think is a place where so much thinking, developing, scientific advance is kind of happening. It's a multicultural city, and it's a great place to be on the cutting edge of things.
It is in one sense culturally on the cutting edge as well, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
you know, the Oxford of today is not the Oxford of 50 years ago.
It's not.
Yeah.
One of the things we do when people come on our programmes is we take them on a tour of Oxford, showing them the kind of Christian and religious heritage.
Yeah.
And you know, Oxford is only there because of a shrine and
Yes.
and the miracles of God. And it's been a place where new ideas have come and been sifted and thought through. And so when we're talking about being sort of public Christians and doing public theology, where better to be really than Oxford?
And do you find it antagonistic, representing this sort of oppressive Christian religion, you know?
It's not always easy.
No.
And it is a place, I mean, we've seen just recently with the Oxford Union and who they've decided to invite and some of the pushback they've had, and that it is a place where things are contested, but then that's the place to be.
Yeah.
So I suppose it depends a bit on your personality.
Yeah.
If you're the sort of person who kind of wants to be in the middle of those discussions and debates, then it's a great place to be, and I don't find it that hostile. I think.
By the way, I'm the same. I enjoy.
Okay,
I think iron sharpens iron, and we've got nothing to be ashamed of with the gospel. So why not show it?
Yeah.
You know, to the.
And I think as well, particularly if you're thinking as a Christian like me, you want to engage with other opinions in the world. You want to find the best versions of those opinions. You want to find the new things. You want to find, you know, whatever's sort of going on. And it's a place where, as I say, where scientific discoveries and vaccines are being developed, even while down the road there's a kind of big debate about decolonialisation and the Rhodes Statue and all those sorts of things. Yeah. It's all very live. So what a great place to be.
Yeah. Now, we have a very wide audience, Charlie, and so apologetics needs to be unpacked. Apologia, and how do you explain?
Yeah, great. So Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. Apologetics is about giving an answer or a debate. Actually, it comes from a particular verse in the Bible, which we come back to time and time again from 1 Peter chapter 3. And Peter is talking to Christians who are facing astonishing persecution. And there's threats out there in the world. What are they going to do? And he says, do not fear. It says, do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. In your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. And it's that word answer, which in the Greek is apologia. And so the idea really of apologetics is to say, how do we give an answer to the questions or challenges? If people are willing to engage with a Christian viewpoint, what can we say? Perhaps what can we say in defence when we're attacked, but also what can we say positively and warmly and engagingly and persuasively when there's an opportunity?
Yeah, so even if someone isn't asking the question, my question to you is, how do you penetrate those who are completely indifferent to the Christian message in our modern culture?
Yes, so I think it's a great question, and actually it's a problem that in one sense, anybody who's got anything they want to share with other people has got. How do you get people to wake up to the fact there really is something going on here? And there was a temptation, I think, to therefore be quite controversial. The kind of clickbait where, you know, the various news articles are trying to get your attention and want you on their website, and therefore they choose the most controversial version of the story. They put that as the headline, they try and get you. And I think that can be quite tempting for Christians to say, I want your attention, therefore I'm going to say something bold and outrageous.
And then you really just attract a support base, and you're then just preaching to the choir.
You are, or you also attract people who want to fight.
Yes.
And it's quite fun having a fight, a sort of intellectual fight. It's not always all that productive.
Yeah.
So I think, actually, you're saying, and the context here in 2 Peter is that they were, in 1 Peter is that they were living such different lives. Yeah. So you had this group who were living for others, not for themselves, who were really committed to the family and to the poor, and they didn't give allegiance to the emperor in a very secular empire. And so there were both positive reasons people might have listened, but also kind of questions. Why? You seem to be living a different way. What's behind that? And Peter says, always be prepared to give an answer. And so I think one of the answers is actually if Christians lived out our faith, if we actually obeyed God and we were astonishingly generous with our money and we weren't always standing up for what we're owed, but instead how we could serve others. And there are going to be specific times where we say we're not going to bow down to that particular movement or idea or even power structure. We're going to do it politely with gentleness and respect, but actually there are times we're going to say no. People will notice.
Because the point is, we say it's tough today, but you've sort of alluded to how tough it was in Peter's day, and even before the religious rulers in Acts 4, you know, they said, shut up. And he said, well, we have to choose whether we obey God or man, and then that opens up the opportunity to say why.
Yes, I think there is a narrative, sort of particularly in the kind of modern West or postmodern West, of saying, we are facing persecution, the church is being sidelined. Actually, we still enjoy astonishing freedom.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to undermine that there are particularly some live legal cases where religious freedom is under threat. But compare what's going on in Britain, where, you know, in Oxford, where I live, where you might have somebody campaign against something, but you know, you're not going to be like beaten up by your family and forced to live on the streets, as a guy I met. Who lived in East Africa.
And so the challenge is to get the sort of run-of-the-mill Christians to just have a bit more confidence, to pipe up and to share in a simple way, you know, the faith.
Well, and that's why Ochre exists. So we say that we're about glorifying God by confident, connected evangelism. So evangelism being the preaching of the gospel, and we want people to be confident. And one of the big things we find is that people are not confident because they're really scared of the controversy or of sort of being left looking stupid because they're not able, they don't have anything to say, they're not able to respond, and they believe something that doesn't, they know has a foundation, but that they can't articulate the foundation of.
That's right.
And so we talk about giving people confidence, not by sort of just giving them some clever tricks, but actually by helping build a foundation in Christian faith.
Yeah. That's sort of relevant to contemporary culture as well. So you'll be addressing some of the modern arguments, let's say.
Absolutely. So confidence and connection.
Yeah.
Because I think there are some very loud voices speaking or apparently speaking for Christianity in the world. Yeah. But often they do it in a way that seems really tone deaf to the cultural conversation.
That's right.
One of the big things we talk about.
Partly because that's what I was saying, they're just building up a support base. And that is not a brilliant model for, I think, for ministry and for the Great Commission.
Have you ever been in a family argument? Maybe not for many years. And when you know you're wrong, you just get louder. It's that sort of thing where, you know, you just go, it just is. And I think there is a thing sometimes where the volume and vociferousness with which we talk about Christianity can actually, it can reveal an insecurity. If we really are confident and we're revering Christ as Lord, as Peter says, if we know that we stand on the truth and the truth has reason, it's not merely just something we really hope is true, but it is factually accurate and defensible, then we don't need to fear, we don't need to shout loudly. Actually, we can really engage positively with people. So we talk a lot about listening.
And I suppose in our theology, we do believe it's the Holy Spirit that opens someone's heart. So, you know, we shouldn't be trying to open the heart ourselves.
You can't argue somebody into the kingdom. No. I don't mean that there aren't persuasive arguments for something, but you can't browbeat someone until they finally sort of say, yes, I believe in Jesus, because that wouldn't be real faith. That would be some.
But it's a sort of heart issue. So I didn't mean to go down this road, but you know, there are folks who, even if they can be persuaded intellectually, their hearts will never turn. Or equally, their heart will turn irrespective of the arguments.
Yes, and you've got to be careful about separating the different parts of a human being, but I do think you want to sort of think about the mind and thoughts. Yeah. You want to think about what we would call the heart and emotions, although that's not really the Bible way of thinking about it. So sort of our thoughts, our feelings, and then our will, our kind of moral desires. Yeah. And there is a kind of interesting kind of dynamic between those things, because if you really want something, you can normally come up with an argument for it. You know, and so you know you're on a diet and you really fancy ice cream, and you go, well, I don't know, if I have it now, I'll have a cheat day now, and then I won't eat so much on Saturday. There's a way of justifying things, and I think that is. We've got to be aware that the battle for the kind of human soul, for the human person, is going to be about thoughts, is going to be about feelings, and is actually going to be about those moral decisions. And so somebody could be convinced that all the evidence for Jesus rising from the dead is solid. They could even get a sense of how warm and wonderful it is to know that peace, but actually they might say, I don't actually want to make this step because if I acknowledge that Jesus rose from the dead, I have to put him on the throne of my life. And I don't want to do that, and therefore actually I'm not going to go where the evidence leads. I'm not even going to go with some of the appealing feelings, because there's an act of the will.
So I throw in, none of these are scripted questions, but are googly here. So, explaining the supernatural, because the Christian message is not just materialist and, social. That it's sort of founded on the Lord's virgin birth, his death and resurrection and ascension and his miracles. How do you engage a culture that is not at that point? How do you actually address that?
Well, partly I'd actually contest whether our culture is open to those sorts of things. I would say that there are two kind of prevailing kind of ways of thinking. I would say sort of let me talk about Britain rather than the rest of the world, because actually the whole world is astonishingly religious. Most of the people in the world acknowledge some sort of supernatural deity or force or something. Most people know that the stuff that I can see and and taste and touch and whatever, they know there's more than that. That's not all there is. But so I would argue that even though in modern Britain, although apparently sort of almost claims to be so rational and kind of naturalistic, which would be that kind of naturalism, or materialistic, the material world is all there is. Actually, there are loads and loads of people who do something.
Yeah.
Most
but the media, let's say, the mass media would ridicule it. So, you're giving a defence, like Peter, and you've got this sort of onslaught, as it were, deluge of mockery. How do you break through?
Somebody said, we don't need to.
Yeah.
I think that again can feel like, oh, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
I think that's often what particular church institution can do, is it goes, the church is shrinking, we need to grow the church. And you go, well, hold on, Jesus said he was going to build the church. Yes. So actually your job isn't to build the church. And I would say the same here when you're talking about trying to convince somebody. Paul does say, since we know God, since we know what it is to fear God, we seek to persuade men. Yeah. So there is a persuasive there, and that persuasive will be argument, rationality, intellectual evidence, all these sorts of things. But I can't make somebody. It's not my job to sort of get them over the line. Actually, that is the work of God. Yeah. And so my argument actually is even stronger. It's more secure. I'm not quite as frantically anxious about it if I know that the ultimate result isn't on me. My job is to give faithful. An answer for the hope that I have, to be faithful.
Yeah. Okay, so you do courses. What age group does it resonate with? The ministry of Ocker, or is it all age groups?
Broadly, it is. And so we basically do two things. We go out ourselves and we train others. So we always want to be those who are practitioners. We are engaging each week. Our team are on average of somewhere between 5 and 10 different speaking engagements. Wow. Churches, prisons, parliament, wherever it is, we want to go out and speak. And then we want to train people. So we're doing it and helping. And we run courses for people at different stages as well. So it's all ages and stages. Although we do something particular called Reboot, which is for under 18s, our sort of teen thing. So we have Reboot Locals.
Very important age group.
Oh, and it's fun. It's so much fun. So Reboot City is, and we do them around the country, so 2 or 3 a year. And we go to a city and we get as many young people as we can. And there's a few pre-prepared talks, but it's open Q&A. They can come, whether they believe in God or not, they can come with any question they want.
Excellent.
And it's really important. In fact, just this summer with the youth group in my church, I did live Q&A with them. And I had 12 young people just sitting around with me while the sermon was going on. And I said, here's some index cards. You can have a sweet for every 2 questions you give me. So they're scribbling. Oh, it's brilliant questions.
I used to get sweets for answering the questions right, in the Sunday school. But
well, one of the things I was really struck by is we don't always encourage the asking of questions.
No.
Like your average kind of a Bible study in a church is the leader asks you a question.
That's right.
Where's your opportunity to go,
exactly.
I'm not sure about this. And
very good.
One of my favourite questions was, what was the name of Jesus' granddad? Which is a wonderful question. Not only is it answered in the scripture, but it reveals that if Jesus was a historical person, he had grandparents. Where did he go to school was another question. Those sorts of things.
Yeah,
like, yes, Jesus actually lived on this earth. And so it revealed that, and the Bible answers it because it's an obvious question to ask.
I just remember some of the most profound questions came from my daughter when she was almost just beyond a toddler. Daddy, what's wrong with you know, eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Shouldn't we know about good and evil?
Yeah.
Well, Helena, you know, it's not just a matter of knowledge, it's a matter of wisdom.
We don't really
knowing between what is right and wrong.
Yes, because people get annoyed with the child who always asks why.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of annoying question. You
Yes.
go, you know, come down, you know, finish your dinner, and you go, why?
Yeah.
Well, because it's good for you. Why? Well, because it's got nutrition in it and vitamins and things, and that'll help you grow. And don't you want to grow? Why? You know, and we get annoyed by that. And yet, I think it's such a shame we lose that inquiry and question. It's a good question to ask God. It's a good question to say, why? Why do we believe this? Where does this come from?
Yeah.
And I think it is that inquiry that we ought to encourage in everybody, so that we can find truth. Yeah. It's what leads to scientific discovery. It's what leads to the invention of great things. Is when you're looking at the problems and you're trying to make things better. You're looking at the gaps in your knowledge and trying to find the answer.
And respect those. So Paul, the Areopagus, they basically had some kind of reverence for all of these plinths and statues, not to denigrate them, but then say, but have you thought about this plinth to the unknown God?
Well, I think Paul does something really interesting when he goes to Athens. So Athens at the time, it was, I suppose, a little bit like I would argue Oxford is. It was this place of thinking, learning, developing new ideas. If you had a new idea, you went there and you pitched it. Some sort of intellectual dragon's den.
Yeah.
And that's what the Areopagus was, where he ends up speaking. And I think what he does is, a lot of the time we can think of sort of Christian interaction with the world as face-to-face. It's an argument. I've got my opinion, you've got your opinion, mine's right, yours is wrong.
Yeah.
And so what
Doing my best to hold back.
Yeah.
You know.
But I think what's so interesting about what Paul does there is he always sort of says, let's not face each other, let's sit next to each other and let's look at the truth. We're all trying to finding out what's true. You're interested. In fact, you've even got an altar to an unknown God. You're acknowledging there are limits to your knowledge. Actually, I can fill in that bit for you.
Yeah.
And he even says, and your own prophets have said this, because you've got this truth already.
So you need to be well read on where they're coming from.
And culturally well read as well. It's not,
Yes.
I mean, books are brilliant,
Yeah.
but you've got to listen to people. And not even just what's going on, their highfalutin ideas, but what's going on in somebody's life. I mean, you notice that all the time in Jesus. Each interaction is actually a personal interaction or with a group of people. He knows what's going on. He asks more questions than he answers, Jesus, because he's engaging with real live people.
Yeah. I'm not a high-level scientist. I did a Master's of Science, but I see this dark energy and dark matter, which they can't explain, as a little bit like the plinth to the unknown God. Yeah. You know, because whatever advancements there are in scientific discovery, they're most with integrity would say, well, there is this big, dark, unknown, and that gives us an opportunity to say, have you thought of this as the missing piece in the puzzle?
But I also think it's not even just a God of the gaps, it's that he says even what you do know isn't full. So he says that bit, in him we move and have our being. Actually, I can tell you more about that God. In fact, it's the same God here. There's actually only one God. Yeah. And he doesn't need us to serve him. In fact, he's the one who made us, and he is there so that we can reach out to know him. So it's not almost saying, because the only problem with that kind of idea of there being these gaps that we fit in is that God is getting smaller and smaller the more we find out. Whereas the wonderful thing is the more that we find out about the world, God gets bigger, at least in our imaginings, because we begin to know more about him.
That's good. I suppose it's just there's an opening. If someone concedes that they don't know something, at least you can say, well, have you thought of this as an explanation? But,
and that's why I'd also really recommend that we also say when we don't know.
That's good.
If it's a side-by-side exploration of the truths, then we don't have all the answers, and they might have an answer. There's a doctrine of common grace, which is that everybody God has made has received something of God's grace, whether it's just in the oxygen in their lungs, their heart beating. Well, that means
being made in his image.
Being made in his image, absolutely, which means that they will, through common grace, have access to true knowledge of God. It might be partial, but all of our knowledge is partial. And therefore I can learn. I could even learn from another religious tradition. I might be saying, fundamentally I disagree because we disagree about Jesus. But there might be things in your culture that actually I really need to learn from, or there might be things that my church need to learn from your Sikh temple, because actually we've forgotten this bit, and hospitality.
And the heavens declare the glory of God, and the order of creation. You know, there's an imprint of God's creative.
There is, but it's only really understood by what we call special revelation, that God makes things known in his word, and most completely in his word made flesh.
So where, Charlie, are you steering people, or are you just doing your bit, as it were, in the Lord's great plan of salvation, or do you feel a mandate to try and steer people, let's say like Billy Graham, to a point of conversion? You know, what's the sign of success? Is it the stats of those attending the courses? Is it those who go on into ministry later in life? You know, how do you gauge, you know, the impact of Ocker?
Yeah. I think it's a really good question for any of us to ask about our lives, any ministry. I think numbers can be helpful, but they really, if you're at best, tell sort of half the story. And we also quite cautious about measuring or counting conversions. Yeah. We tend to talk about people who've responded. So actually, if we go and we speak at an event and 30 people respond, then we celebrate that 30 people responded. We don't know. Maybe 2 of them had already been Christians who'd wandered a bit. Yeah. Maybe actually a couple of them, they didn't really know what they were coming through, and it was peer pressure. So we want to be realistic about this. Like, Jesus had crowds around him when he did miracles, and then when he dies, there's just a couple of women. So we want to be realistic about that. Yeah. And so what we've done is we've sort of worked out, okay, we're going to create videos online that help answer people's questions. And the amazing thing about the internet now is you know how many people are watching it. People can comment and they can like and subscribe. And so that gives us, it doesn't tell us, are we doing everything? But it does say, are we actually answering the questions that people genuinely have? Are we helping people? Yeah. And it's the same with courses. Our church-based course, you can run a video course in your small group to help you engage with people's questions. Right. We want to know how many people are using it, because if 3 people are using it, then we could probably make it a better course. Yeah. But if people are really engaging with it and their feedback forms, it's great. But also the thing I think is really interesting is that Jesus focused on a very small number for 3 years. We talk about the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000 and all these crowds, but most of the time he was with 12 people, sometimes even just with 3. In fact, sometimes he went off on his own to pray. Jesus invested for 3 years in those, and they still got it wrong. And so one of the things we want to do is we want to help as many people as we can, but Jesus founded a global church by focusing on 12 people. And so we also want to be saying, the person in front of me is just as important as the 100 people that I was speaking to from a platform. In fact, this interaction with one person could actually be more meaningful. Yeah. And you notice that in Jesus, he would stop in the middle of a crowd for a woman who touched his cloak, and he sees that woman. And so I think one of the jobs is let's think about, everyone cares about numbers when it's in your pay packet. So, so numbers are important, but the real question is not how much money have you got, but like, can you look after your family? Can you help those in need? It's what are you going to do with it? And I think for me, that's
why. And only the Lord ultimately, it's not a cop-out, but only the Lord ultimately knows, that mentoring that you've achieved in someone's life, it might bear fruit. Yeah. Long after you're
Jesus
gone.
Focused on 12, and one of them betrayed him.
Exactly.
One of them outright denied him. Quite a few of them fled. Yeah. They came back, and he filled them with, and all but one were there, being filled with the Spirit, and went on to live lives of gospel proclamation.
And the commission is to make disciples, not just to sort of claim scalps, as it were. So making disciples of all. That's quite a commission.
And that's an interesting thing actually about apologetics and the kind of answering the questions is it something you need to do throughout your life? The way you ask a question when you're inquiring about faith is very different from perhaps the way you ask it later from sort of inside the tent. Yeah. Or the way you ask a question about suffering, say when you're a teenager. You could have gone through suffering, but it might be a very intellectual kind of like you're a philosophy student and you love big questions and you're trying to looking for a satisfying answer to theodicy, that kind of technical term. But it's very different from when your spouse gets cancer and dies in their 50s, and the same question comes up about where's God in pain, but it's asked in a very different way. And so actually it's something that we don't just need to be asking these questions right at the beginning, and then this assumption that right once you're in, then you know everything and just carry on. Those questions come back in different ways, and we need to kind of keep returning and say, okay, God, I want to seek you, I want to understand. And so that's why, again, I think it's really important to be saying we don't know.
Yeah, brilliant. last couple of minutes, tempted to ask a few more, you know, controversials. But I think there was this Talking Jesus survey, wasn't there, that asked people throughout who were of different ages when they gave their heart to the Lord, and a large proportion it was in the early years. So you do focus on the youth, do you not?
It's a major priority.
Yeah.
I think in various studies as well. I mean, the Evangelical Alliance did a great job with the Talking Jesus research, but various other studies show that people make up their minds at some point between the age of about 12, 13, up to about 30. That's where you make most of your life-changing decisions and things. And so that is a really key age group. There's also a question for me, though, about, like, if most people in the church, or the biggest proportion, seem to become a Christian while they're teenagers, who's telling the gospel to everybody else?
Good point.
And I know many people of maybe later in their life who begin to see through things. Because when you're young, you're fit, you're attractive, you're chasing boys or girls or whatever, you've maybe got a career ahead of you, or there's things you want to achieve in your life. And I think there's another couple of stages, really, but basically where you begin to achieve a lot of the things you thought life was about. And then you look around and go, is this it?
Exactly.
And so I think I would say, yes, absolutely. And that's why Reboot is a major priority for us. But also, I think, later on.
Great. All I can say is that's it.
Thank you very much.
This is it. And thank you so much, Charlie Stiles, Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. And thank you for joining us on Face to Face.